Hello and welcome to another episode of the Better Brain Fitness Podcast. I am Dr. Josh Turknet, and I am joined as usual by my nimble co-host, Dr. Tommy Wood. Hello, Tommy.
Hello.
Okay, so today's episode be a little bit different than the norm. We've done this maybe once or twice in the past, but every now and then, or some of the questions that we get from you guys are ones that maybe don't always merit an entire episode and can be handled in a little bit shorter span of time. So we're going to package those together for you in a rapid fire sequence that Tommy is going to answer. And we have enough of them that we can cluster them around specific topics. So we're going to start today's rapid fire on the topic of supplements, some of the questions we've gotten on that topic. Are you ready to go, Tommy?
I'm ready.
Okay. Our first question comes from John W. in Maine. He asks, are the advertised vitamins effective in maintaining brain health?
Yeah, we were joking before we jumped on that this could be it. This could be several episodes just answering this one question. So I'm going to take this question at face value. There are lots of kind of supplements that come on like commercials and TV breaks and stuff around brain health, etc. There isn't a ton of evidence for many of them, if any of them. I think there is a little bit you'll often see some of them, like maybe the only ingredient is cognizin, citicoline, or CDP choline. There is some evidence for that, particularly in older adults, maybe supporting some aspects of memory, lots of randomized controlled trials. And choline is a critical nutrient for the brain, but you could get it from eggs or liver. So that's probably the only one where maybe I'd say, yes, there is a little bit of evidence to support this for certain individuals. Choline supplementation also potentially important after traumatic brain injury. We've talked a little bit about this previously. But beyond that, no, there isn't a ton of evidence except for now after the Cosmos trial, which was this massive trial, thousands of older adults in the US. 2 arms of that trial got a multivitamin, and that did seem to be associated with some improvements in cognitive function. The multivitamin was Centrum Silver, the most basic multivitamin for older adults. Is like 100% of the RDA of everything, no mega doses or anything like that. So I think there is some evidence for a really standard multivitamin. Cover your bases. We have evidence for randomized trials, no mega doses, nothing fancy. That we have some evidence for. Beyond that, most things are just marketing and hype.
And I'll say real quick, I think it may be helpful for to think about when we're talking about supplements, 2 categories, like ones that are aimed at maybe replacing or a deficiency or something that we might not be getting enough of, right? Mm-hmm. And then another kind that are like touted as having some kind of medicinal effect or whatever, that like a pharmaceutical would have. And I suspect that the Centrum is the reason for its benefit. I think you're on much more solid ground in saying that, yes, if you're correcting for some sort of deficiency in a nutrient that we know is linked to brain health, that's likely to be beneficial. And what a multivitamin may be doing is plugging in some of the gaps.
Yeah, and so there is actually a third. So like that first group you talked about, there's like I would think there's like 2 actually, like there's like an A and a B. Mm-hmm. And so one is just kind of making sure you're getting sort of like minimum requirements of multiple. That's like a multivitamin. But then there's also like therapeutic doses in actual deficiency, right? So if you have a very elevated homocysteine, you want to take more than the recommended allowance of B12 and folate, right? We have evidence for that too. So yeah, 2 components of that. Then some of the other questions that will come up will be more on that sort of like pharmaceutical high dose, separate beyond the sort of core nutrients. But again, for many of those, not much evidence either. I'm giving the game away.
All right, on the next question. From Martha in Mountain View, Arkansas, who asked, speak to the use of lion's mane, reishi, and chagall mushrooms to promote brain health.
So there's been a lot of interest in medicinal mushrooms over the years. I'll separate out lion's mane first. I'll come back to that. The next two, reishi and chaga, they have kind of been touted as being beneficial for brain health or like health more generally. Like actually, most of them, reishi and chaga, most of it's like around immunity. There's which is just like a whole can of worms and like just like super vague. What does that even mean? So there's been like a couple of studies of like reishi in individuals with cancer, and they've looked at like some kind of immune markers. Chaga, most of it is based on like test tube studies and kind of theory. Actually, very little evidence that either is directly beneficial for brain health. Sometimes when people talk about mushrooms and medicinal mushrooms, they'll talk about the benefits of beta glucans. And beta glucans themselves do actually have much better evidence. So there's some evidence that supplementing with beta glucans might decrease future risk of respiratory tract infections like viral infections. But most of those studies use yeast beta glucans and not mushroom beta glucans. There's also evidence of oat beta glucans being important for cardiovascular health. Meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials saying it might improve blood pressure, blood sugar, blood lipids. But of course, I mean, you could just eat some oats, which would be my preference. And actually, the mushrooms with the most beta glucans are probably maitake mushrooms, which you would just eat for pleasure. So eat some mushrooms because they're tasty, but there's actually not that much in terms of the sort of the extracts having specific effects for brain health. Lion's mane, also delicious, is slightly separate. It's had this. It's become like this supplement that we assume is really important for brain health. There's like one not very good study from 20 years ago that suggested that taking lion's mane improved circulating levels of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and therefore we assumed that it would have some effects on the brain. Circulating BDNF in the blood does actually not get into the brain, and we don't have any evidence that the brain makes its own BDNF. And some of the things that make the body produce BDNF also make the brain produce BDNF, but those are not necessarily the same thing. We don't have a ton of really high quality evidence of lion's mane having an effect on cognitive function. There was one recent study, I think it was in like young, healthy adults, where they gave 4 weeks, they gave them nearly 2 grams of lion's mane a day. They maybe saw some improvements in mood, like after a single dose, like acutely, there was maybe an effect on the Stroop test, like a response, like a sort of executive function type test. But when I read the study, I don't feel particularly convinced. The kind of the variability in the data and stuff, I think they just like looked at a bunch of stuff and then just reported the ones that sort of by random chance had become significant. So lion's mane, when you see it in supplements, is never at that dose. As far as I can tell, it's usually maybe a couple of 100 milligrams rather than a couple of grams. And I'm still not that convinced that there's that much of an effect there. So eat these mushrooms because they're yummy, but I'm not, for brain health and cognitive outcomes specifically, haven't seen a bunch that sort of convinces me that they're a supplement worth sort of widespread use.
So no magic mushrooms, except for the magic mushrooms.
Yeah.
All right.
That's a separate podcast.
Totally separate. Okay. Next one comes from Lyle in Texas. He asks, since acetylcholine is necessary for learning, should older people do something to boost acetylcholine production?
Yeah, this is a good question. So in the supplement category, we're generally talking about 2 different things. One is citicoline, CDP-choline, cognizin. I already mentioned that earlier. There is actually some evidence for that in individuals who are experiencing some cognitive decline. Taking something like 500 milligrams a day may help with things like memory. Similar potential benefits after brain injury. There is another form that people will see called alpha GPC. It has a lot of different names, like alphosphoglycerocholine, something like that. So when you're sort of like looking up for evidence for alpha GPC, sometimes it's under one of these other, like, it's sort of like formal names. This might have like an acute effect on some aspects of focus and attention, because it does seem to acutely boost acetylcholine release in the brain, as far as based on what we know. But you'll often find that people don't like the way it makes them feel. It sort of can make them kind of like feel jittery and edgy. And in terms of long-term benefits on cognition and dementia risk and things like that, there's actually very, very little evidence. I think we have a little bit more evidence for cognizin or acetylcholine. And that's generally, if somebody wants a choline supplement, that's generally what I'd recommend. Because, in specific sort of, people have specific issues after a brain injury or some elements of cognitive decline. We have some good evidence there. Then we've talked previously about the fact that, yes, acetylcholine signaling, cholinergic pathways, that's sort of driven by this, are really important for focus and memory and attention. And they are affected by the processes of aging. And that does, and it was one of the reasons why these drugs in this pathway are used for symptom management in individuals with Alzheimer's disease. It doesn't change the trajectory of the disease, but it may, for some people, may help with early symptom control. But just adding more acetylcholine into the system doesn't fix the problem, right? So if you're not getting enough choline from the diet, yes, these things could be beneficial. And choline is also important for aspects of metabolic health. It helps like lipid and cholesterol management in the liver and things like that. But there are, we've talked previously about some studies where specific types of brain training, particularly we talked about the active study, that type of training, processing speed training, seems to improve cholinergic signaling in that part of the brain. And so I think that, yes, make sure you get enough choline in your diet. If you're not eating choline-rich foods, potentially a supplement could be beneficial. But actually exercising the machinery of focus and attention is going to be really important too, because that's actually what decides whether those things are going to, that signaling is going to be directed towards something and actually used. And there's some evidence that you can improve that with cognitive training or cognitive stimulus. So I don't think the supplement is the big issue here. I think this largely comes to how you're using your brain and are you continuing to challenge those pathways.
Real quick, would you think of this in some ways, choline in particular, along the lines of how you might think about protein if you're doing resistance training, in that if you have a cognitively demanding lifestyle, using your attentional resources a lot, that at the very least it's a nutrient that you might want to be more mindful of than you would if that weren't the case. Both in terms of like you making sure you're getting enough for your diet, and if not, then supplementing in those situations.
Yeah, probably. And it's not a bad comparison either, because actually, getting enough is important for everybody, regardless.
Right.
But and most people probably don't get enough. There are some population studies that suggest that the majority of people don't consume enough choline. Eggs used to be a big part of the diets. People are eating fewer and fewer eggs, and eggs are the primary source of dietary choline. So yeah, I think that a lot of people probably don't get enough, but the rate limiting step of using your choline for acetylcholine may be how you're using your brain. Just like the rate limiting step for how much muscle you make is often not the protein you eat. It's whether you're actually challenging your muscles with physical activity.
Right. Conceivably, you could be aggravating a mismatch by doing more in the situation. That could cause its own issues. All right. The next question comes from Tim in Marion, New York. Similar to what we've covered, so it'll be quick. Are there any known brain health benefits from supplements or vitamins, perhaps CoQ10, lion's mane, fish oil, etc.? So a couple there mentioned we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, so CoQ10, again, not a ton of evidence specifically for cognitive outcomes. It has a little bit more evidence for like cardiovascular outcomes, so maybe like indirect benefits. But where I've seen And there is some debate about the quality of these studies, I will admit, but like where I've seen CoQ10 potentially be helpful is in individuals who experience fatigue or muscular side effects from taking a statin. Some of that may be due to impairment of CoQ10 production. So like statins impair the production of LDL cholesterol, but that same pathway includes the production of Q10, which is really important as an electron carrier in the mitochondria. So, and there are some studies that show that you take a few hundred milligrams of CoQ10 that can help offset some of those symptoms. Those like not everybody gets those symptoms. Most people have no symptoms whatsoever. But if that is a side effect and you want to continue taking a statin, there are obviously other options too now, and that's kind of improved over the last 5-10 years. Then CoQ10 can help there. So it's mainly focusing on cardiovascular work rather than brain. But indirect there because we know that cardiovascular disease is a significant risk factor for dementia and cognitive decline. And then we talked about lion's mane, fish oil. So there are, and we've talked about a few studies on fish oil. We've talked about fish oil quite a bit. I think that if you're not regularly consuming seafood, and particularly if you have a measure of your omega-3 status, so if you're able to get something like an omega-3 index, it's less than 5%, especially if it's like 2 to 3%, which is the percentage of EPA plus DHA, the two long-chain omega-3 fatty acids in your red blood cells, then there definitely does seem to be benefit in supplementation. And it's usually, sort of 2 to 3 grams total per day of a combination of EPA and DHA. And I think both are important. And that was what we talked about a little bit on our last podcast with a study that only gave DHA and didn't see as many benefits as people were maybe expecting. Then we also know this is dependent on B vitamin status. And we've talked about this previously. If you have elevated homocysteine and you replenish or you supplement with omega-3 fatty acids, you see less benefit, and vice versa. If you supplement with B vitamins but you have poor omega-3 status, you don't see the same benefit. Now, several randomized controlled trials show this. So, consider an omega-3 supplement or a fish oil supplement if you don't regularly consume seafood. But it would be useful to do some testing to see whether you need it or not. And these things are relatively easy to get now. Yeah. Or just eat sardines, which has B12 and omega-3s in it. Maybe as a salad, so you get some folate.
Go figure. The food packages it all together in one convenient place. All right. Let's see. Next question is from Cindy in South Carolina, who says, I've been reading about taurine. What are your thoughts on its usefulness as a brain supplement?
So taurine, very interesting, maybe best known for being one of the active ingredients in things in energy drinks like Red Bull, Monster, etc., etc. Actually, not that much evidence for taurine and on its effects on cognition, but some better evidence in a couple of other areas. So there are now like meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials showing that taurine supplementation may improve aspects of metabolic and cardiovascular health. So again, blood pressure, blood sugar, and blood lipids. Like not massive effects, but some evidence of benefit. That's taking something like 2 to 3 grams a day. Similar doses up to 6 grams a day, or 6 grams may have acutely boost aerobic type exercise performance. So you may be beneficial for like exercise performance, less so on cognitive function. So could be considered in those who have metabolic disease or need to improve some aspects of metabolic function. I would argue that there's a lot that we can do with diet and sleep and nutrition strategies more broadly than necessarily needing supplements for this. And obviously, we have very good evidence for treating high blood pressure with blood pressure medications, particularly as it comes to dementia prevention. But I will say there is some reasonable evidence for taurine on that, less so on direct effects on cognitive function.
All right. Next up, I have recently, this is from Maria in Spain.
Mm.
I've recently watched a video of a nutritionist and fitness coach talking about using creatine supplements for people over 60 alongside resistance training exercise. According to what he said, it could be beneficial for gaining muscle mass, reducing fatigue, and improving bone health. What's your take on the issue? And would you recommend taking this supplement for older people? If so, what is the correct dose to use and how long? Never missed a chance to talk about creatine. Here we go.
So we have done a full episode on creatine previously, but I think actually in terms of populations who could take creatine, we do have some better evidence in older adults. So if you look at the meta-analyses of the effects of creatine on cognitive function, it seems that the greatest evidence of benefit, and again, it's not massive, but like some statistically significant effects in particularly in older adults and particularly for memory function. The most evidence we have for creatine is obviously in terms of supporting physical performance, physical exercise. So it like helps you get a little bit more work done in the gym over time. That then helps to build greater muscle mass and strength. There was one study that gave 10 grams of creatine a day for 2 years to menopausal women. It was with or without resistance training, and resistance training was the most important thing for improving bone health. But there was maybe some suggestion that there was a greater benefit in the creatine group. But again, it was the lifting weights that was the primary driver of improving bone health. And that's always going to, like, for all of these things, it's how you use your body, how you use your brain. Creatine may sort of help you get a bit more work done, which over time could translate to slightly sort of like better function. So it's kind of helping you do stuff, but it's not going to be magic in its own right. So it's the best studied supplement. It's incredibly low risk. We have evidence starting at around 5 grams a day for like cognitive and physical outcomes. Like I said, 10 grams a day was the amount given to that study I just mentioned on bone health. So that's generally where I'd start, 5 to 10 grams, and probably 10 grams for most people is a decent dose. But again, it's not a panacea. It's sort of like, I think of it as like it helps you get the work done, and then over time you've done more work, and therefore you might have better function as a result.
Any reason to take it in one dose versus distributed?
Yeah, there's again some evidence that somewhat that if you get much above like 10 grams, you might saturate creatine uptake transporters in the gut. So then you might experience some like GI type side effects. Other reasons why people might experience GI side effects is low quality supplements that have like other stuff in there, potentially some contaminants or other things. So yeah, you might take 5 grams twice a day. I think that's perfectly reasonable. But it just depends on whether you like. I take all my creatine in the morning because I'll just forget to take it later.
Yeah.
So.
and what do you do? 10 grams a day?
I do 15. But because I'm just like bigger than the average person. Yeah. All
right. Next one from Greg in Asheville, North Carolina.
What? Before you ask this question.
Yes.
How long should you take it for? Just take it forever.
Forever.
Yeah.
Never stop. All right. Paid for by the creatine industry. Next is
until you've achieved whatever your cognitive or physical goal is. That would be fine too.
There you go.
But you don't need to cycle it. It's perfectly safe, like all that stuff.
Right. Yeah. Okay, Greg in Asheville says, I'm curious about your opinions on the increasing number of brain supplements on the market, especially those that claim to provide an easily metabolized acetylcholine boost. Are there any credible studies on efficacy of this sort of supplement, or whether they are simply passed out in our urine to no effect?
Yes. So I think this is particularly talking about alpha GPC, which we mentioned earlier. Like I said, like there is some evidence that can give an acute boost to some measures of focus and attention, but I think long term that's not going to be the primary driver of those functions, right? Sleep, cognitive stimulus, all those things are going to be much more important in terms of our ability to maintain our focus and attention. So some people do like it. Some people really don't. It kind of depends on the individual. I think in terms of long-term cognitive protection, we don't have much evidence. And in general, one of my favorite sayings is there's no biological free lunch. If you're taking a supplement to get more performance out of, or something out of your brain that it isn't naturally making available to you, you're probably going to be paying for that down the line in terms of greater recovery requirements or a loss of function later on. And that's the case with most supplements, even those sold as nootropics, which shouldn't have negative downsides later. Most of them do. So none of this is good or bad. It's just acknowledging that taking some kind of daily brain supplement that has some of these things in may then create greater demands on the system that require more recovery, or could potentially lead to a loss of function later on, or dependence on some of these things. That's the case with caffeine and some of these other things as well.
Right. All right. Last one is your thoughts on low dose lithium orotate supplementation.
So I did go back down the rabbit hole on this specifically for this question, and it could be an episode in its own right, but I'll try and give the highlights. So lithium has been of interest in multiple different areas. So one is obviously in the sort of mental health space. It's obviously used as a treatment or in bipolar disorder at very high doses, hundreds of milligrams. And that the form they use is lithium carbonate. That's the most, which is a very bioavailable form of lithium. That's the form that's used in that setting. There's also been interest in lithium for a long period of time because there are some epidemiological studies that suggest that populations where there's more lithium in the groundwater, so people are consuming more lithium just because it's in the water they're drinking every day, have lower rates of things like deaths by suicide. And that's been actually found in like several counties or states in the US. They've found similar studies, I think, in Europe, like Denmark. And so it's been kind of interesting that we never really thought of lithium as an essential mineral, but then there's been this idea that maybe it actually it does have some important effects. More recently, two things have happened. There was a randomized controlled trial of lithium supplementation in individuals with mild cognitive impairment. It was 150 milligrams a day, which is still that's a big dose. Like if we're talking about low dose lithium supplementation, we might be talking like a few milligrams a day, 1 to 5 or something like that. So 150 milligrams a day didn't really show any benefit. Like if you squint and you really wanted lithium to have worked, you could be like, oh, maybe there was like an effect, but didn't really seem to have much of an effect on cognitive function. Then there was a very widely publicized paper published in one of the Nature journals looking at multiple lines of evidence around lithium and cognitive decline in Alzheimer's disease. So the first thing they did is they looked at the mineral content of brains of people with different stages of cognitive impairment at death. So people who were cognitively intact, people with mild cognitive impairment, people with Alzheimer's disease. And what they found was that compared to all the other minerals like magnesium and calcium and other things, lithium specifically was lower in brain tissue of those who had worse cognitive impairment at death. And what they also found was that lithium seemed to be sequestered inside amyloid plaques. So like amyloid plaques in the brain are kind of like sucking up all the lithium. And then that affects the lithium content of the rest of the brain because it's not getting that lithium. And then that was thought to have some effect on cognition. So they then took this question to mouse studies, and what they did was in like normal regular mice and also mice that are have multiple genetic mutations to overaccumulate amyloid, they gave them a lithium deficient diet, and they saw that if there was essentially no lithium in the diet, more amyloid plaques were accumulated in those mice that had were sort of bred or have genetic mutations to make a bunch of amyloid. And similarly, like lithium was kind of getting sequestered into amyloid plaques. And then they also did some other studies that in sort of like older but not genetically modified mice, eating a lithium free or a lithium reduced diet was associated with worse cognitive function. And all of these, they did some mouse tests of cognitive function and saw that like less lithium, more amyloid, worse cognitive function. and this could then be recovered by supplementing with lithium orotate, low dose lithium orotate. And they also use lithium in some of the assessments. They also tested lithium carbonate because that's the other form that's widely used, right? They did some weird studies where they looked at the two, like lithium carbonate, lithium orotate, and they looked at like which type of lithium, if you have like synthetic amyloid plaques in a test tube, which type of lithium, or does the type of lithium matter in terms of what gets like bound to that amyloid? Kind of like thinking about like if amyloid is sequestering lithium in the brain, does the type of lithium matter? And they found that less, if it was lithium orotate compared to lithium carbonate, more like less of the lithium got like bound to this sort of like artificial amyloid plaque in a test tube. I would argue that experiment makes no sense whatsoever, because the lithium, when you take it as a tablet, it doesn't get into your brain as lithium orotate. And then that orotate, which is like the compound that just kind of like binds the lithium so that you can then take it, that wouldn't be having an effect on how that lithium then binds to amyloid in the brain. And actually, both lithium orotate and lithium carbonate should fully dissociate in the gut, and you just absorb the lithium. You don't absorb the thing that's carrying it. They did do some studies like in mice where they gave them lithium carbonate or lithium orotate, but the dose comparison was weird. It was never sort of like fair 1-to-1. That kind of suggested that, even like lithium orotate versus carbonate, lithium orotate had a better effect reversing some of these effects of the low lithium diet than lithium carbonate did. I can't say that it's not true, but like it doesn't make sense to me biologically, because all of that lithium should just get into the brain as lithium, and they're both very bioavailable forms of lithium, meaning that it fully dissociates in the gut, and that lithium just gets in as the ion. So even if we believe that lithium orotate is better than lithium carbonate, fine. And actually, so like there were some old studies back in the 1970s where it was proposed that lithium orotate got into the brain better than other forms of lithium. Again, that hasn't really been replicated. And seeing as we use lithium carbonate in people with brain disorders, right? Obviously, that lithium is, I think, is what we can believe is getting into the brain. But even if we believe at face value that lithium orotate is the better version, which I'm not sure about, but even if that is true, like that's fine, because most lithium supplements you could buy online are lithium orotate, because lower dose supplements, 1 to 5 milligrams or something like that, they do tend to come as orotate. And this is historical, because of these studies in the 70s. They were like, if you're going to take lithium as a supplement, it should be orotate, rather than anything magic about orotate. But if lithium orotate is the best version, I then looked at, well, what's the dose that's having these effects in the mice? And if you sort of compare it to human doses, it's about something like 60 micrograms a day. And so when you then look at what typical lithium intake is of humans, it's for most people, it's like a few hundred micrograms a day, because you get it from food. It's in most vegetables, it's in dairy, it's in meats, it's in your water, right? Unless you're drinking reverse osmosis water. And so the amount of lithium that they're giving extra isn't enough to make a big difference in terms of the amount of lithium that we consume on a day-to-day basis just from our food and our drinking water, if that makes sense. Like, it might increase it by 20 or 30%.
Right.
And so after all of that, I'm not convinced that like lithium orotate supplementation is going to have that much of an effect. Unless you just, for whatever reason, you don't seem to be consuming much lithium. And this could be possible, right? You filter your water. Lithium content of food is very dependent on the soil and the water and that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so, yes, I think from the studies they've done, at least in mice, if you don't have if you don't consume any lithium, that's probably bad for your brain, right? So like lithium obviously has a biological effect. It's important. You need to get some. The doses that they're supplementing with are much lower in human equivalents than most supplements that you could get sort of online. With all that said, if you're concerned, because it's not like we regularly do lithium tests or anything like that. If you're filtering your water, you're not sure if your food has enough lithium.
Right.
If you took 1 milligram of lithium orotate a day or 500 micrograms of lithium orotate a day, that's probably fine. Like you're in that kind of range of you're just like getting enough. But I think it really is just making sure you're getting enough rather than supplementation is required. That's kind of where I ended up after sort of looking at all this.
Was the you mentioned the study? What was the population of the people who got it, the 150 milligrams a day? The human study.
Oh, they had MCI, mild cognitive
MCI.
impairment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So there hasn't been a trial in Alzheimer's.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess that'd be the only other question.
So it's possible that if you do have significant amyloid burden,
right,
that supplementation would be beneficial because
the
amyloid is right. But MCI is maybe that population probably does have a reasonable amyloid burden, right? There's going to be some, and supplementing in them at least wasn't enough to show significant effects on its own, right? As with everything, is lithium going to be the answer to all of this? No, but it's probably going to be permissive, right? You just need to make sure you're getting enough on top of all the other things that we're talking about, just because it does have important biological effects.
Okay, we did it. That concludes the supplement.
Was that, does that count as rapid fire?
Rapid fire. I'm not. I think the last one might not qualify, but I think the other ones, yeah. Overall, you did good rapid fire. Okay, so we did this because partly we want to try to answer all the questions that we get, because we do read them all and want to give you feedback. So if you do have more for us, please feel free to send them our way. You can reach out to us, comment on Substack. You can also click the link in the podcast description or go directly to brainjoe.academy/questions and ask it there. And we'll be happy to take a look and hopefully answer it in one way or the other at some point in time. So some of these were a little bit older, but you see, we did get around to them, right? So all right. Thanks so much, Tommy.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks for listening.
Yep. Thank you all. See you next time.
Bye.